Last time I talked about women on this channel, maybe I might have been a little bit sexist. This time I'm going to take a look at not just the actresses and the characters, but the writers behind it. In my defense, I did at least make a slight attempt last time.
And welcome back to the heart of the stories we tell. I'm Rob the host, and this is another look deep into what makes a story, a theory on storytelling by a storyteller who believes that every story has merit. And tonight's episode is...
Women in Horror Month. February has been for a couple of years now. No, not that type of women in horror. Those have been around forever. No, specifically what I'm talking about are writers, directors, people who work behind the scenes, people who are creative type. And first, let me just tell you a little bit about this. Women get a lot of shit for being in these types of fields. A lot of writers that are women get told, hey, you should write romance. And why is that? Because they're women and women write romance. And that's why Women in Horrors Month started. But the first time I heard that, I'm like, wait a minute. It wasn't Mary Shelley like one of the most famous horror authors of all time? Didn't she give us the monster that everyone thinks is Frankenstein? Oh well, I guess maybe it's not as new of a thing as I would have thought. But I've already talked about Mary Shelley, so I want to talk about more contemporary people. But before we do, let's talk about what I do here. I normally review stories, I do Throwback Thursdays to do older ones, and then I do Sunday videos like this, where I take apart theories of storytelling. Now, this particular theory is a little light on the theory and strong on the pimping out other people's cool work. But if that sounds interesting to you, subscribe, because we're going to go through a whole list of people that I think you should be looking at, if you enjoy horror in general, and if you're looking for a woman's perspective. And that's not to say a feminist perspective necessarily, just someone who might have a slightly different point of view than you. Because that's the real benefit of this sort of thing. When you get other ideas and other versions, other ways of looking at stories, you end up with a more nuanced look, and we can learn something from each and every one of them. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that you have to agree with every one of these choices. I personally have not read all of them. In fact, what I did was I went to some of my writer friends and asked them for suggestions, and then I took all of the ones that I didn't think would be a good individual take for a creator spotlight and put them in here, where I'm doing a whole bunch of creator spotlights all in one. So let's talk about women in horror. And we're going to start with a contemporary writer who writes mostly in the horror, but not always, Linda E. Rucker. Now, she first came to my attention in Tomorrow's Cthulhu, where she wrote a very interesting story. But she has a new one out, The Moon Will Look Strange. If you're looking to first get into her head, this is a good one, because it's a collection of her first sets of short stories that were sold in other publications put together for it, and, at least according to her, a good look inside her psyche. But moving on, another spotlight would be Larissa Glasser. And she has a rather interesting look on things. She writes what a lot of people consider to be weird horror, which means things that are outlandish and crazy that are happening, things that take you by surprise, things that are meant to make you feel uncomfortable, to make you question all sorts of things about yourself, about the environment, and she does this very well. She has several books out, but the one that I think that she would most like you to look at is this one, F4. Now, it is a strange and surreal set of story taking place all over the place. It's a cruise ship on the back of a sleeping kaiju, is how Amazon describes it. However, then I'm going to go into a slightly more famous writer, Mercedes Yardley. She won a Bram Stoker Award for her story Little Dead Red, which is a really great twist on the classic story of Little Red Riding Hood in a modern setting. And any of you that know that I love that sort of twist, that sort of change in the setting. She's been writing for about 8 years now, maybe 9 years now, and as such has a pretty extensive back catalog of books for you to check out. Just Google her name or follow one of the links in the descriptions, and you can find quite a few interesting, pretty messed up, gory stories from her. But up next is someone that I want to talk about for multiple reasons. She's a poet, that writes horror poetry, which isn't exactly that common, and her name is Linda Addison. However, as much as normally I would push something she wrote, I want to push something that she put together instead. Cyrex's Daughters is a series of fantasy and horror stories written specifically from African American women. And now I know what you're going to say, why specifically them, but it makes a very interesting and unique turn on how we do things in horror and how things push through when they all get filtered through one gaze. In this particular one, she not only went out and found the best writers she could, but she helped them develop these stories in ways that will just amaze you. Everyone agrees Cyrex's Daughters is definitely one of those books that you really need to pick up and try if you want to try new types of horror. But Women in Horror is more than just books. Jennifer Kent directed a movie that you may not have heard of yet. The Babadook. The Babadook is a really messed up story about this kid's book, and the story ends up haunting him and his family. And the important part here is that it was directed by a woman, and not a lot of movies are. But in this particular case, the direction is awesome. From the way that she pans through things, from the way that she slightly tilts the camera for those Dutch angles at just the right moment, from the pullback reveals to even the jump scares, and you know I'm not a big fan of the jump scare in general. Everything about this movie is brilliant, and you should definitely check it out. And remember that when you do, the woman in charge was the woman that put it all together. Now, I got way too many suggestions for this. In fact, so many that I had to just narrow it down to these few that I believed in. But I'm going to just quickly scroll through some of these here for you, because there are some really good writers out there. There are some really good artists, people that bring the horror genre to life, that don't get that much attention because they happen to be women. But while I'm doing this, I also want to say that this may have partially been an excuse to not have to do another Valentine's Day video. So I have to actually bite the big one, because I'm sure there's a horror story that you guys are all thinking about, or a subset of them, that I didn't mention at all. And that is the subset of horror that women get cast into a lot, because it's kind of like romance. In fact, it's got romance in the name. It's the paranormal romance. And that's what people said my Rebels and Runes review was technically, although normally it's a few other books that I read. So we're going to pick up here next week when we talk about Twilight and Monsters in Romance. I'll do my best to keep personal thoughts out. But for now, let me know down below, who is your favorite woman in horror? And did you know there is a Woman in Horror month? Did you ever take a look at their website? Let me know, and maybe we'll talk about it another time. For now, if you could do me a favor and give me a thumbs up and share this video, I'm trying to build a subscriber base here to try to get back into monetization, because come February 20th, you need 1,000 subs to do it. But for right now, I'd just like you to hang out and talk cool story stuff with me. And in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this quick and refreshing look at the women of horror as we walk through the heart of the stories we tell.